So just like that, as soon as Tottenham build any form of momentum this season, as soon as it looks like we're turning a corner, we're back around that same corner and in trouble. A really, really poor performance against Nottingham Forest, and I'm not going to lie, it was one which my head was gone. My head was gone on Sunday, so I've had a bit of time just to sort of gather my thoughts and try and deliver a bit of a calm take with this one, but it definitely was a bad one. So let's get straight into Nottingham Forest 3, Tottenham 0. So this was the lineup that Tottenham went with. Overall, I think pre-game, if we're splitting hairs, again I've sort of been saying this for a while, would have preferred Odubel or Tell on the left-hand side. It's because Richarlison through the middle, don't think he's that effective despite the goals that he's been scoring, and I'd actually like to see Kolo Muani through the middle and maybe Simmons on the bench, Richarlison on the bench, and maybe Odubel or Tell. But overall, if we go back to what the lineup actually was, didn't hate it. It's a sort of lineup we've seen in the last two games against the sort of Brentford, Slavia Prague, and we've seen that. I think the best sort of football that we've played under Thomas Frank, admittedly, this a bit of a small sample size to choose from, has been with this lineup. So in that sense, there's not too much blame I can put at Thomas Frank in terms of the actual team selection, because pre-game when this come out, I thought, 10 out of them 11 players I probably would have gone for. Maybe Benton Court coming out for Bergval, maybe Odubel Hotel coming on the left. But overall, when I seen the lineup, I thought, that's not a bad team, and we're in with a chance here. But with Tottenham, any sort of logical thinking or sort of optimism goes out the window very, very early on, and more often than not, it's us who are the architects of our own downfall, and that was exactly the case in the first half. Now, quite a big reason why, over the last sort of month or so, I've been really, really wanting to see the likes of Wilson Odubel or Matisse Tell on the left, is that Mohamed Kudus, for as good as he's been, I still feel like we're not getting the best out of him, and I think there's a reason for that. A lot of our play goes down that right hand side. A lot of it is Porro sort of getting the ball to Kudus, maybe an overlap, but more often than not, it's sort of a long raking ball, not raking, but a long ball into the box, which is eventually cleared. And I think that's a lot to do with our system, and we're just so one-dimensional. And you could see from the opening sort of 5 or 10 minutes, they were up in Kudus' face. They were trying to harry him, trying to, stifle any sort of play that was positive from him in the Spurs top. And we've seen it that I almost got the feeling that I knew we weren't going to win this game within about 5 minutes, and that was because every time Kudus got the ball, they were doubling up on him, and he was getting frustrated. I think he gave away about 2 or 3 fouls in the first half, which weren't petulant in any way. They were just sort of late to the ball, sort of chasing the ball when you got maybe 2 or 3 people around him. And it's something that just makes us so one-dimensional. And I think of, in particular, when Antonio Conte was at Chelsea, a lot of the time we'd see the likes of Marcos Alonso getting on the score sheet or Hazard getting on the end of things, and sometimes that would be where Hazard would go to the right and he'd attract the players, and then it would leave the likes of Pedro and Alonso unmarked at the back post, where more often than not they were going to put it away. And I think if you're gonna focus solely on build up through the wings, it can't be just down one wing. It really can't. And when you look at that sort of left hand side, you had Spence, who, yes, he could play left back, and I don't think he had a terrible game. But everyone knows he's right footed. Everyone knows that if it's a deep block, you're going to force him onto the left because that's not a stronger foot. And more often than not, you're going to come onto the right hand side, and then you've got him coming inwards, and then you've also got Richarlison or Moane, who a lot of the time, well, not a lot of the time, they're not necessarily left wingers, so they're getting the ball, and almost their body shape's almost at like a 45-degree angle already, and it almost limits what we can do going forward. And we really, really are either crying out to go and sign someone who's a left winger and is proven, someone like a Semenyo, which I don't think we're going to do, or we can just fast track the likes of Wilson Odobert and Matisse Tell's development by playing them on the left hand side. I know they're two players which are going to really, really split opinion, but they've just not been given a consistent run of games, and it's very, very frustrating because Wilson Odobert, especially some of the Champions League games, we've looked such a better team with him in, and it's not necessarily due to what he's done when he's been on the pitch. It's more just the balance. It's the fact that they can go both ways. They can receive it with their back to goal. They can take players wide. They can cut inside. And when you've got a striker playing left wing, you know that they're going to want to get into the box and they're not really going to take people on. And it just made us so one-dimensional. And our build-up was so bad. And it was actually what the first goal come from. Build-up where there's no one really showing. And to his credit, Archie Gray showed for the ball and ultimately he got his pocket picked. I don't think it was a great pass by Vicario. I don't think it was solely Vicario's fault, but I do think he stitched him up a little bit with that pass, and it just looked like players that didn't really know where they were meant to be, and it was almost like Archie Gray was sort of breaking that mould just to try and restart us, get us going, and that is very, very worrying, and especially against a team like Nottingham Forest, who have had their struggles and they've had a bit of an improvement under Sean Dyche since he's come in. But we've seen that they can be got at, whether it be in different tactical setups or different managers. Those players can be got at, and we just didn't, trouble them at all, and that was so frustrating. And I go back to the point about the left hand side and the sort of lack of identity we've got down the left and the lack of cohesion. And I think his name's Selina, who was playing right back. He got booked on the 30th minute, and first half, if you're fullbacks on a booking, immediately you're sort of thinking get to half time, maybe bring on another fullback just to ensure that you don't get sent off if they're having a bad game. But we don't know if he had a bad game because no one run at him. You've got Odobert, Tell on the bench, and I don't think Tell come on till about the 80th minute. And yes, I know it's not as soon as a player gets booked you can't just bring on a sub to run at him, but mix it up a bit, show a bit of variety, put Kudus on the left hand side, run at him. Colin Milwani and Richarlison, yes, and not necessarily left wingers, but even if you switched it up and put Richarlison on the left or someone like that, just to really, really go at them. And it was so frustrating because to me, as soon as that first goal went in, I knew the game was done, and that is the feeling that I get this season. Yes, there's been times in early September where we're coming back from games and we were getting a point away at Bodo, Wolves, Brighton, that sort of thing, but we just don't have any sort of attacking cohesion, and it looks like players are just confused, and it looks, maybe I'm being a bit too critical here, but because they're confused and they don't know where to be, what sort of attacking relationships they can build up, it looks like they were passing the ball to pass responsibility. And I know that seems harsh, but that's generally the feeling I got, and I don't think it's necessarily an indictment on the players to say, oh, they're all selfish, they don't want the ball. It's because no one knows where they're meant to be. There's no attacking structure, there's no attacking play, there's no build up. And Thomas Frank's come in, and at first I thought, yeah, well, maybe he's sorting a defence which conceded a lot of goals last year, lost a lot of games, and part of me maybe naively thought, well, this is his sort of foundation as a manager, is build strong from the back and then you can move forward. But that attacking rhythm and that attacking patterns and play just hasn't been there, and it is so frustrating to watch, because when your attack's not functioning and your midfield's not functioning, all that pressure is going to come back to you. And we've seen it time and time again. Every single time we went forward, we pretty much lost the ball, and then it was back and we were counter-attacking and we were chasing, and it was like watching Tottenham from last year, like a hangover from Postecoglou's team. And with both of them, no one likes losing as a fan, but at least under Postecoglou, for all of his faults, maybe people might interpret this as me saying we shouldn't have sacked Ange, but I think Ange was right to go, and ultimately his failure to adapt is basically what cost him his job. And Thomas Frank is in real trouble if the same happening to him, because we're not adapting. And when it comes to chasing games, at least it was a bit more entertaining under Ange when we were chasing games. At least we were going forward with a bit of attacking purpose and actually looked like we could score goals. But we just never ever got the feeling that we're ever going to trouble the keeper, apart from one snapshot from Archie Gray, which on replay was probably quite a comfortable save. We offered absolutely zero in that first half. And, you know, a lot of the time people say, look, it's a new manager, he needs time, he needs support, he needs backing from the fans, he needs backing from the club, he needs backing from his players. But it just looks like these players don't believe in whatever Thomas Frank's trying to tell them, or it's either that or whatever he's telling them is just confusing them, because we look like a team of strangers out on the pitch. And other than maybe Porro and Kudus, I'm looking at the pitch, and yeah, maybe Van der Ven and Romero, but that's because, you know, because of the back four that we played, naturally they're a partnership. But if you take away Van der Ven and Romero, and then maybe Porro and Kudus, I don't see any relationships over the pitch, and that is such a big concern. You go back to some of the best Tottenham teams. The best team that I've seen in my lifetime is probably the Pochettino Tottenham team, and you know, if you go through that team, the sorts of goals we score where it was Eriksen to Ali, or Kane to Ali, Ali to Kane, Kane to Son, all of these sort of partnerships that we are just not seeing at the moment, and it is so frustrating. And if I'm honest, I can't see this getting better. I really can't, unless something drastic changes and there's some sort of internal, you know, sort of meeting held by the players and Thomas Frank. I can't see a way out of this for him, and it's a shame because I really wanted Thomas Frank to work. When Postecoglou was under pressure last year, I really felt like Thomas Frank was a guy who was probably that sort of halfway house, but it's sort of been symptomatic of the way Tottenham have sort of operated since we moved into this new stadium. We've gone from Pochettino, who was largely an attacking manager, to Mourinho, who's a defensive manager, and then obviously you've got Nuno, you've got Conte. So defensive managers, fans were bored of defensive football. All of these sorts of slogans over the stadium, the game is about glory, to dare is to do, and we're just seeing none of it at the minute. I mean, if you look at it, we've gone from those defensive managers, and then we went to Ange, and when he was appointed, you had Johan Lange saying, this is Tottenham, this is the Tottenham we want to build in the image. We want Tottenham to be, you know, neutral fans to say, yeah, I like watching Tottenham, they're a good watch all the time. They might not win all the time, but they're entertaining. And we've seen glimpses of that with Postecoglou, but he went too far, and it's almost like, well, we tried that, so, you know, that possible concept of an attacking manager doesn't work anymore, so we've got to go to the complete other end of the scale and get Thomas Frank. And yes, I don't think that Vinay Venkatesham, Langer, all of these people who were involved in the appointment of Thomas Frank necessarily thought it would be this defensive, but we've gone from one extreme to another, and we just need a middle ground. And unless Thomas Frank can show us that, it's not going to be him, because at the minute it is so bad in terms of going forward. Even defensively we've got worse, and really, can you blame the defence when every single time they're going forward they're getting their pockets picked and the ball's coming back because we can't sustain attacks, we can't keep the ball in midfield, we can't play under pressure. It is so poor. And that first half, for anyone who's unsure about why Tottenham fans have been having doubts about Thomas Frank, that was the game to watch. And if I'm honest, Arsenal away, Chelsea at home, Wolves at home, Monaco away, Fulham at home, and you add in this game, that's at least 6 off the top of my head, and we're only, 15 to 25 games into the season? It really was such a poor first half, and the most frustrating thing is I wasn't surprised one bit at all. It felt so predictable, that first half. Before the game, you probably can't read it on there, but my notes are just going to read you what I put. This is pre-game. Targeting Kudus is definitely going to happen. Doubling up could be a game for Odubel or Tell from the bench. Obviously, we didn't see them from the get-go, and we ended the first half on 0.12 XG, which is just, you know, I don't think XG is the be-all and end-all, but it certainly tells a story, and the parts of the story that it does tell don't look good for Thomas Frank, they don't look good for Tottenham. And only at 1-0 at half time, we were lucky to go in only 1-0 down. And if I was watching that, and look, I'm not, you know, Thomas Frank's forgot more about football than I know, but as a fan you feel something, and that counts for something. You know, when you're trying to sort of instill this belief in the players, but the fans don't feel it. How do you expect them to get up for it? And it was so poor. No sorts of changes at half time. You waited till you went 2-0 down to make changes. And then we took off Jed Spence and brought on Ben Davies, which, look, Spence is the only left back that we've, I say left back, sort of, back up to a doggy that we've got. And he come off for Davies. So I'm thinking, okay, Spence has been pushing forward down that left-hand side, and he, maybe it's about managing minutes and that sort of thing, so I can see why he brought Davies on. But what he should have done in that point is, Spence was one of the only players pushing forward. Kolo Muani was trying, but he wasn't really getting anywhere. But Spence in that first half was bombing on, and I thought that was one of the few positives in that first half from an attacking sense, so we need to carry that on even if Spence isn't on the pitch. So why he didn't put someone like Van der Ven at left back to sort of carry on that momentum, that pace, ball carrying, and instead he brought on Ben Davies, and when he come on, it felt like it was sort of systematic of the sort of play that we're seeing. A lot of the ball, and this isn't a slate on Ben Davies, I'm not saying this is his fault, I'm just saying why it was a poor sub in my opinion, is that, a lot of what Ben Davies is good at is crosses from deep, balls into the box, that's not into the box, or into midfield with a sort of whip pass or channel balls, and we've seen none of it. Every channel ball that we've seen was just sort of gone out for a throw-in or was pressured and forced to go backwards. And to bring him on and Paulinho as well when we're chasing the game, and to take off, Bentancur and Gray, I don't think either of them had a great game if I'm honest, but to bring on Paulinho when you're chasing a goal, Ben Davies when you're chasing a goal, Bergval I thought was a good sub, but for the positives of bringing Bergval on, you're bringing on a more creative-minded player, but you're also bringing on Paulinho, who's a more defensive-minded player for, Gray or Bentancur, whichever one it was. Bringing on Ben Davies, who's a more defensive player when you're chasing a game, and it was just symptomatic of Spurs at the minute, and especially Spurs under Thomas Frank. Second goal again, bit of a fluke goal in terms of I don't really think that Hudson-Odoi meant it, but it went in and that's all that matters. For Corio, questions are going to be asked. I think I've just got this weird sort of theory that if you're being chipped, and look, I've never played in goal, but maybe it's just from an aesthetics point of view, but if you're a goalkeeper and you're being lobbed and the ball ends up in the bottom corner of the goal as the ball goes in, that tells me that your positioning is not right and that you may be unprepared. And look, I don't think anyone in the ground was expecting Hudson-Odoi to score when the sort of ball left his boot, but it was just so poor. It was so poor. And again, it's another, goal from range, a lack of pressure. And then the third goal come from Sangare, again a goal from range, a lack of pressure. I think there's a compilation which was doing the rounds on Twitter of all the sorts of goals that we've conceded from the edge of the box, and I think after Sunday's game that was up to about 9 or 10, and that tells me that it's a system problem, because when the ball's in the box we are just sort of, it's like we're glued to our own penalty area and we don't get out quick enough, we don't press the ball, and it's almost like maybe because Thomas Frank doesn't believe in his teams making long shots, that he thinks that every manager thinks that way, and that that's basically signs of a good setup, but it's not. When you're conceding 10, 11 goals from distance, that tells me it's a systematic problem. That tells me that we are, defence first, because if you're defending your own box, if you're playing in defence, as soon as the ball sort of goes backwards, that should be a sign to push up, get out, relieve some pressure, and we haven't done that. And it is so frustrating because it feels like it's the same thing happening every week. And I really, really thought that after Slavia Prague and Brentford that we'd maybe turned a corner and we had a glimpse into what Thomas Frank's Tottenham could look like. But those two games, you just have to put that down to how the opposition played. And as fans, as match going fans who pay as much as we do, who make the sacrifices, whether that's financial costs, travel, even things like annual leave if you're going for an away day, all of those things, are such a huge, you know, factor in people's lives. And when we're just playing with fear and almost like a that will do attitude, it's disrespectful. And for people to come out, the likes of Porro and Frank, say, oh, the real fans shouldn't have booed Vicario. Yes, I disagree with booing the fans, but when you've played as badly as you have for a team which have the most expensive amongst the most expensive season tickets in Europe, for what we get back is not good enough. And that becomes a time where, when fans are being treated like customers more and more in the global in the sort of game and the modern game, the more you start treating fans like customers, the more their expectations are going to go up. And when those expectations aren't matched on the pitch, people are going to be unhappy. I don't think anyone that booed Vicario against Fulham were thinking that they were going to go there and thought, yeah, do you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to boo Vicario because that's really what I want to do. It's not. It's out of frustration. And when we are just not addressing these things, it is so irritating, because as soon as that first goal went in, I knew the game was done. And when you're seeing the same goals being conceded, the same problems in build-up, the same problems in attacking, it gets to a point where you say sometimes you maybe need to call a spade when we are just seeing these things happen and no sort of change. Often we're seeing Matt Wells, Justin Cochran and Thomas Frank all in discussion. They must be seeing these things, so why are we not trying anything new? For a manager like Thomas Frank, who's as adaptable as he has shown a staggering level of pragmatism, where he's just, he's seeing these things unfold in front of his eyes every single week, the same way all of the fans in the stadium are, and it feels like nothing is being addressed. Nothing, what can they be talking about? And, that they see, which they think, well, we are conceding a lot of goals from these things, but we'll keep going because there's underlying positives, which mean when we do master it, we're going to be a better team. If we were trying this attacking football when it wasn't quite working out, I'd say, yeah, maybe this manager does need a bit more time, because when it clicks, it would be good. And yes, there was parts of Ange's when it did click, we played some beautiful football, but it just didn't happen on a consistent enough basis. But I'm really struggling to see what Tottenham Hotspur looks like in Thomas Frank's image, and if he carries on the way he is, just being stubborn, not changing, for someone with a reputation of being as adaptable as he is, he's not changed a lot. That 4-2-3-1 stuck pretty much all season, apart from the PSG game in the Super Cup and Arsenal, and something needs to change. And if it doesn't, then I think there's going to be a change at the top for Tottenham Hotspur, because I cannot see how Thomas Frank carries on like this. But ultimately, 1 point taken against Nottingham Forest, Wolves, Fulham, Bournemouth. 1 point, and it's worth pointing out 3 of those games were at home, 3 of them. And I think this is our worst start to the season in terms of the amount of points we've accrued since 2008, 2009. I think that I've got the tweet in front of me here that says the last time Spurs recorded fewer points at this stage of a league campaign was in 2008-09, 18 points. And I'm thinking, last year, as bad as it was the second half of the season, there's very much an understanding that players were overworked, the options weren't there in terms of the injuries caused, other sort of factors, the Europa League run. And last year, as bad as it was in the league, we had something to fight for on another front. And are we going to win the Champions League this year? No. Are we going to win the Premier League? No. FA Cup is pretty much all that we've got left to fight for this season in terms of an actual trophy. Champions League, yes, we're only about 6 or 7 points off, but it is within reach, and I feel like the longer this goes on, the further and further away it's going to be from out of our reach. And people say about you need to give the manager time, that sort of thing. I completely agree with that sentiment. Generally, I don't like getting rid of managers and then having to go through the whole rigmarole of a new manager every year, and then you can't judge the players because it's a new manager and everyone's got a fresh, clean slate. I don't like that sort of thing. I like continuity. I like having a manager who's there for a long time, learns from his mistakes, is adaptable. And I thought that's what Thomas Frank was going to be, but it's just not at the minute. And as harsh, I don't even think it's really that harsh I don't think he will, but if a notification come through in 5 minutes that Thomas Frank's left the club, I don't think you'd have too many complaints, because we did it with Nuno, and I guess the difference is that when we sacked Nuno, you had a clear outstanding candidate in Antonio Conte, whose style of football, at least in the first season, was suited to Tottenham. And at the minute, there just seems to be a lack of options out there, and people will come and they'll say, look, Venkatesham's done this before, he's given Arteta time, and look how that's planned out. But one thing that people forget to mention is that Mikel Arteta had 2 seasons without fans in the ground, and I can guarantee you, if there were fans in the ground and in some sort of parallel universe the fans were in the ground and all of those results remained the same, he would not have got to a 3rd or a 4th season, and that is simply the facts. And I think sticking with a manager because you're afraid of the backlash that's gonna come of it is never really a good sign to just keep a manager. It's the same as if you were in a relationship and maybe the first month's really good, but then when you get to month 2, 3, 4, 5, you're fighting all the time, you're arguing, and I mean fighting in sort of an argumentative sense, not physical. But if you're arguing all the time and you're saying things are going to get better, and you're working further and further down the line, there needs to be a point where you say, well, you need to think about what's best for you, and Tottenham need to think about what's best for them and what's best for the players, the assets that we have, the likes of Xavi Simons, Kudus, even moving on to some of the youngsters like Bergval, Tell, that sort of thing. I don't feel like he's the best manager to get the best out of them, and if I'm honest, I'm really gutted because I thought Thomas Frank was going to be exactly what we needed, and I'll hold my hands up and say, yeah, I was wrong. The same way that I feel like the club is wrong in just persisting with him, because we need something, because ever since we moved into that new stadium we've had so many new managers, and to think that Postecoglou was probably our longest serving manager throughout all of that time, and he was there for 2 seasons. Like, in my head, when I think of a manager stood there on the sideline thinking, when I'm thinking of a manager and that home stadium and who's going to be in the home dugout, it's Postecoglou, and that's because quite simply he's the longest lasting there pretty much, and he's only there for 2 years. So there's a real lack of continuity at the club, and it just seems like we're springing from pillar to post, just trying to find something that works. And I feel like what we should do in terms of playing the Tottenham way, the identity, all of this stuff that the likes of before him, Daniel Levy was pushing when he was at the club, Johan Lange, Fabio Paratici, Venkatesham, all of these people talking about identity. Going for a manager like Postecoglou, who's attack-minded, has a clear identity of how he wants to play, that is the route to go down. That is traditionally the route that has brought the most success for Tottenham. You see it with, even the Arthur Run push and row team. Admittedly, I didn't see it then, but it was one of the teams that defined a generation. Bill Nicholson's 61 team, the Keith Birkinshaw team that won the Europa League, Harry Redknapp's team, which conquered that sort of barrier of breaking into the Champions League. That was all with good football. Pochettino, who took us to the very pinnacle of European football and was just a whisker away from getting there. All of those managers, all of them, had a clear identity and style of play, and Thomas Frank just doesn't at the minute. And I'm really, really struggling to see if eventually this does, we stick with Thomas Frank and we give him time. I'm really struggling to see how we play. When I shut my eyes and try and think of a Tottenham goal under Thomas Frank, the depressing thing is it's either a long throw-in or a set piece. And, thinking of, again, going back to the likes of Pochettino, and yes, they had their flaws, but they had a clear way of playing. And you could almost turn up to the ground and you think, yeah, it's football, we could lose this game. But at least you know what you're getting. You know that you're going to get a team which is going to go out there and try. And I feel like it's really, really great on the players at the minute. Spence and Van der Ven, we've seen it after Chelsea. They were not happy with the way the team was set up. We've seen it again, Spence, when he took off. And I'm really struggling to back Thomas Frank on this anymore. And I feel like it's a real sort of crossroads we're at. And gun to my head, make a decision. I just say that he's not the guy for Tottenham, and I really wanted him to be, but he's just not. And that's not to say he's a bad manager. He'll go to another team, probably West Ham. I could say about it, like 3 years, doing a good job. But the fact of the matter is that Thomas Frank said, "You take risks by not taking risks," and those words have come back to bite him, and it feels like every time he's talking at the minute, it's just coming back to bite him, like the who's Eze, that sort of thing. And look, I'd love to get to the end of the season and look back and say, what was I thinking in December? Thomas Frank knows more about football than me. I know that. I know Thomas Frank knows more than football than me. That's why I don't work in football when Thomas Frank's a manager at Tottenham. But ultimately, something's got to give, and unless something changes, it's going to be Thomas Frank who's going to be on the chopping board. And that just seems to be the way that it's going at the minute. So Liverpool are up next, and it's a team which have had their struggles this year, and Thomas Frank needs something to get the fans going, to get them believing, to convince not just the board but the players, the fans, that he's got a vision and that he can bring us forward and play in a way that our fans love, and the way that we, idealistically see a Tottenham team playing. And Liverpool team, again, I've mentioned, they've had their struggles. If we can go and get something against them, that would be big, and it wouldn't tip me over into thinking that Thomas Frank is the sort of person that's going to take us forward. But again, it all depends on the setup. It's a Liverpool team which have shown vulnerability, and the way they've been vulnerable this year is teams have gone and attacked them. They don't, that sort of aura around them of them being the best team in England last year. Teams have gone and attacked them and been brave, and that's the teams who've got the points against them, not teams who've just sat back and allowed them to, shoot from the edge of the box, or just push forward and push a number of people forward, knowing that they're going to have more of the ball. And if we set up in that way, we are going to lose to Liverpool, and we're going to lose badly. So we need to be brave. Thomas Frank needs to essentially put his balls on the table and say, look, this is how I want to play, this is what my Tottenham's going to be. And whether we see that or not is another thing, but I'm praying that we do, because I don't want to have to go through all of these managers all the time. I just want some continuity, just want some form of ambition from a team on the pitch. And that's not saying signings and all that things, that's turning up knowing that despite who you've got in your team, that you can go at teams, and there's no excuse not to do that. When you had the likes of Postecoglou, in his first season, having Emerson Royale and Davies at centre back away at Man City, and we still went at them, and we still, yes, maybe we didn't have more of the ball, but every time we did have the ball, we'd look to go forward, and that was the difference. I'm hoping for a result, but the emphasis is on the hope. But all we can do now is wait and see what happens on Saturday. And until then, up Spurs.